Okay, can you guys see this, my presentation?
Yes, go ahead, Diane.
Great. Okay, so I'm just gonna walk through a basics example for what the potential flow and confining information table would look like in the DJ basin. Just a basic wellbore diagram schematic here. Drilling in the DJ, you might encounter a couple of different groundwater zones. You'll go through some confining formations, and then on to hydrocarbon zones of the Sussex Shannon, confining formations, and then more hydrocarbon zones. So what that table would look like, this is the PDF version of what the Form 2 looks like to be added to the well file. I'll just walk through what we would expect to have across the table filled out. So first zone you might encounter would be a groundwater zone, such as a Lower Arapahoe. You would provide the depths in both measured depth and true vertical depth, both tops and bottoms. For groundwater zones, TDS is a required data point and the data source for where that TDS value came from. The TDS is a range value, so you don't need to know a discrete value for that exact location. There, I think, are kind of 4 different buckets for that, 0 to 500, or 501 to 1,000, and then 1,001 to 10,000, and then if a TDS is greater than 10,000. So you would choose which is applicable for that groundwater zone you're looking at. And if your data source is not there, there's a drop down for other, and then just provide a comment on what that groundwater source for your TDS came from. Just kind of drilling through the well, you might encounter a subsurface hazard such as a coal mine. If you have a subsurface hazard, you choose that as your zone type for the potential flow. The hazard name, just give a brief description, and then whenever you have a subsurface hazard, provide a comment that describes what your hazard is going to be. So in this case, you might say it's a possibility for a lost circulation. You might, if your hazard was H2S, you might say a health hazard on site, and just so you're aware of what you could encounter and how to be prepared for it. And then drilling on through the well, a couple more groundwater zones, Laramie Fox Hills, Upper Pierre. Again, you provide all the depths in both tops, bottoms, NDs, TVDs, and then your TDS value for each. And for your data source, again, if you choose other, comments required. If you choose one of the drop downs, a comment's not required, but it could help out, just describe it, especially if you said you did it from a log calculation. If you say where that electric log is located, it could help our staff identify and confirm where you calculate that TDS value. Going on, you would come into a confining layer of the PR shell, and then hydrocarbons, and again, you provide all those steps. But for confining layers and hydrocarbons, TDS, data source, are not required entries. And then drilling on through the well, you encounter the Niobrara, and you list the Niobrara just as a single formation. We don't need it broken up to Niobrara A, B, or C, or any of those benches. And then on, you have the Fort Hayes and then Codell. In some instances, your Fort Hayes might be a hydrocarbon zone. In other cases, you might list it as a confining layer. And in this instance, you can see the Codell is obviously our target formation with the lateral, with the bottom MD kind of giving that away. But again, you just provide all your depths that you encounter. To call out some things we're looking at in this table, formation names are spelled out, not abbreviated. Formations are not combined, so you don't do Sussex/Shannon or Nio/Codell. They need to be their own separate entry on the table. Groundwater formations must identify the TDS range and that source of that data. And drilling hazards should be explained in the comment column like I went through. So other ones to consider, obviously maybe not a complete list here. Any zone you anticipate lost circulation, H2S, if you think you're going to encounter an under or overpressurized zone, or collapsing shells. Just some bad examples of things that these would not be considered complete tables. If these came on the Form 2, we would need to work to get these submitted correctly. This one was submitted as a hydrocarbon zone, listed out the formation name as the Fox Hills, and it looks like the data they're providing is actually for the Fox Hills. The Fox Hills is obviously not a hydrocarbon zone, it's a groundwater. And then here we had one that was listed with Niobrara/Codell. Again, we want those formations listed individually and not combined so that the depths align with that formation type. And then we do have an instruction document on our website under Form 2 instructions, and it shows snippets from the e-form for how this table looks like in the drop downs and just some basic instructions. That is all I had for our DJ example. Craig, do you want to go ahead and go over your example and then we can take questions?
Sure. I have a couple of examples from the, let me present my screen here so you guys don't have to look at me. Okay, it's been a while since I used Zoom. How do I present? There it is. Okay, can everybody see my screen now? No, I think everybody's muted.
Yes, thanks, Greg.
I'll assume you're seeing the screen. So we put together an example for Rulson Field, which is right there between parachute and rifle. Pretty standard for most of the Piance Basin. So here's the Wellbore Diagram, and we'd expect sometimes you can see some groundwater and alluvium landslide deposits and the Uinta Formation, Green River up there in the higher elevations. Upper Wasatch fractured near the surface, we would expect to be called out as at least a potential groundwater zone. Below that, we have the Wasatch, which we'd like to call a confining formation with maybe a G sand hydrocarbon zone in there. Then you have Fort Union Wasatch, Lower Wasatch, Ohio Creek, and Upper Mesa Verde have some potential to have groundwater less than 10,000. And then you get into your Williams Fork and your gas zones. So what we'd expect the table would look something like this, where you up at the top you have groundwater, maybe as deep as 2,000 feet. I don't know, it depends on the area you're at. You have a confining layer of Wasatch and then a hydrocarbon. And we do expect to see a confining layer between each hydrocarbon and groundwater zone. So then you have some more Wasatch. Then you get into these potential groundwaters in the lower Wasatch. The data source for that is basically some electric log calculations that have been summarized on these field scout cards. Ohio Creek is a potential loss zone and underground injection zone in some areas. A little typo there, that's all right. And then Upper Mesa Verde, you can make some electric log calculations in some areas that may show groundwater less than 10,000. Whether it's mobile or not is one of the big questions. Then you get into your hydrocarbon zone, your Williams Fork. So this would be what the table would look like, we think. And obviously there's going to be some back and forth, and I understand this table can be kind of troublesome to fill out, not the most fun thing to do, especially if you're looking at like a 16 or a 20 well pad. So I would suggest before starting to fill this out on 16 different Form 2s, you can work with your area engineer and have some back and forth with them and see if you can come to an agreement on how to fill this table out, so you don't end up submitting 16 Form 2s that all need some kind of tweaking on them. And kind of the only other area in the west that we're seeing drilling on right now is maybe the Paradox is kind of an interesting example. There's some Kinder Morgan development down there. In that area, we have some surface formations that can have alluvium that could have water, and then the Chinle is sort of well known to have some potential groundwater less than 10,000. We need to track down a data source on that. Maybe leave that up to Kinder Morgan or whoever's submitting the application. And then we do want a confining layer shown there, which is just some kind of shales in the Chinle. And then you end up some potential hydrocarbons in the Cutler and other formations like that. Then you end up with a subsurface hazard down there of the Paradox salt. And I pulled this straight off of Form 2, so we think maybe this needs a little bit of work, because all it says is a data source is a literature review, but you really should call out the hydrogen sulfide safety hazard in there. Then we have another confining layer, and then this should really be called out as the Leadville Formation, which is the source of carbon dioxide down there. So you can see there's going to be some back and forth with getting these tables to where we can all agree on them, and feel comfortable moving forward and putting them on the permit application. One other thing I thought I'd point out is our form might need a little bit of work. We're probably still working on getting this e-form system all the way in, because if you print out a PDF, this is what you end up looking at. Data retrieved failed for subsequent report. So I think our form developer team has a little bit more work to do. So that was pretty quick. Should we just open it all up to questions?
Thanks, Craig. And Diana, would you mind running through the questions in the chat?
Alrighty, does a sampled water well have to be within 1 mile of the proposed well? What if there isn't data within that distance?
Suppose I can answer that one. So the source of the data, if it is from groundwater sampling, that is just one of several options on the table. So I don't know if Diane or Craig, if you could chime in on what you've been seeing so far.
Yeah, sure. I think if there's not one within a mile, it's fine to go out further if you have data out there. But what I've been seeing so far coming on our permits is from DWR or some electric law calculations, and and from we had a internal report that Rick Allison did a couple years ago on the Upper Pierre in northern Weld County that had been listed as a source. So like you said, water well samples are just one of the options, but if you have one that you find that is further out, I think it's fine to list that and explain where you got that data from.
Yeah, and there are a couple of summary reports for some areas of the state, and that's one of the data sources is CGS, that's Colorado Geologic Survey. They've done a report for Mesa County. I believe they're doing a report for La Plata County, but have not finalized that.
All right. Did you say there should be a confining layer between each hydrocarbon and groundwater zones?
Yes. Is that a good enough answer?
Yeah, that's the point of the table, I believe, is to demonstrate that that isolation is present. Next one, what if you do not know the TDS?
Well, then it probably wouldn't be listed as a groundwater zone. I mean, if no one's ever found groundwater there, then it probably doesn't have groundwater.
On the Form 2, if you enter the formations in stratigraphic order, then click Save, the order changes. Is COGCC addressing this issue? With this issue previously identified and/or the time it takes to enter the information across multiple APDs, will the COGCC consider allowing these tables to be submitted as an attachment or creating a template to be uploaded?
So I can answer that first part of that question, where we did notice the order of the rows were changing upon saving and exiting and re-entering. And now we've added the automatic sort feature. So if you exit and you enter in again, it will be sorted by the, I think it's the top TBD. It will get resorted in that order. So if you enter them in a different order, when you log back in, it'll get resorted by the top TBD. What was the rest of the question?
With the issue previously identified and/or the time it takes to enter this information across multiple APDs, will the COGCC consider allowing these tables to be submitted as an attachment or creating a template to be uploaded? I think that's a yes. Not the PDF, but creating a template.
Yeah, and I did mention that this is kind of cumbersome to fill out in its current format, but I don't know that we've had any internal talks about changing it.
But we can consider that, yes. We'll take that as a great suggestion. The next one is, will the formations listed on the Form 2 need to have tops reported on the Form 5? I'd say yes.
Yeah, I think that makes sense for
If they're
you guys have-
present, I mean, the 2 is a planning document and you would anticipate them being there. If they're not present on the backside, then that can't happen. But yes, if they are present on the backside, we would expect that they would show up as a formation top on the backside. Can you report more than one source? That is DWR and groundwater sample. Yeah. Well, should you? I don't know. Can
The
you?
drop down, sorry, Diana, the drop down only allows for selecting one source for the data source, but you can provide a comment that says, you know, a additional data source here that agrees with this range as well. So the way the table is set up, the data source is a drop down option, so you could choose one, and then you could provide a comment that outlines your other one.
Is there a time limit on when the water well was last sampled? For example, I've seen USGS data from the 1980s that have not been sampled again.
Well, it is a data source, and so I think we could use it.
Yeah, I would say so too. It has been mentioned twice now, there should be a confining layer between groundwater and hydrocarbon zones. However, the table currently shown on the screen contradicts.
Well, I guess
So
I'm not sure.
Craig, I think that's referring to Upper Mesa Verde over Williams Fork.
Oh, yeah. Well, Dave, we've all been involved in these discussions to some extent.
So I would say, you know, the intention is to put in the formations and their either hazards or contents essentially as you expect them. So there will be some situations as shown here where the groundwater may be immediately overlying the hydrocarbon. For Piance Basin, that groundwater also, you know, contains methane, but we're essentially looking for the primary fluid type in that zone.
It's a good comment, and so unfortunately, perhaps you need to put in, you know, Williams Fork Shale as an extra row here. And although, you know, operators may have better information in the area, that the Upper Mesa Verde in that area is actually over 10,000 TDS. So it's gonna be, you know, very specific to each area.
I would say back to, you know, one of Craig's earlier points, work with your area engineer. They'll be working with their supervisors. This is a learning process for everyone on this call. So we'll keep moving forward with that.
How is the bottom of the final zone type defined? Is it the proposed TD?
I guess I'm not totally clear on that question, but it would be, you know, the bottom formation that you drill into, and essentially that's where the bit is at TD.
Yeah, I don't know that we'll be scrutinizing that very much.
I think that's going to vary across the wellbore configuration too. For a horizontal, you're expecting it to be in the same formation the entire time. For a vertical or directionally drilled well, you'd be expecting a rat hole, so you would have an anticipated bottom of the objective formation.
Sure.
Does the bottom TVD given for the deepest hydrocarbon zone listed on the PFZ table need to match the TVD on the directional data attachment for the proposed well? That's where difference, if it's a directional or vertical well versus an horizontal, that it's intended to stay in the formation the entire time.
Yeah, when we're reviewing these, we're going to be looking at this from a groundwater protection perspective and
Yeah.
a drilling safety perspective. So I don't
It's
know that-
above, it's
Yeah.
above that formation is really the details.
But I think in general, your attached drilling data should match what you're showing here. So if you are calling out on your attached drilling plan data, the directional data, the formation tops, and then they're highlighted in this table significantly different, I think that's going to be a little bit of an issue. We're going to want to reconcile those because it's still the same plan for the same well.
Yeah, that sounds kind of unmanageable to expect staff to open up the deviated drilling plan and check to make sure that the depths match on this. It seems like an extra step that's really not going to have any benefit.
So I would just add that, looking at the bottom measured depth and bottom total vertical depth on this table, to Diane's point, that should be consistent with the directional survey.
Are the requirements for recomplete moving uphole any different?
Nope. There were no changes there, right?
Well,
Every Form 2 needs to have this information supplied. It's in, right now, the 303 for information requirements on Form 2s. I apologize, I don't know what the new rule number will be after mission change becomes effective, but it's an information requirement on a 2, so you need to have out these potential flow zones and confining formations identified on all Form 2s.
Yeah, but in the case of a recomplete, say in the, here in the Williams Fork, let's scroll up here. So oftentimes they'll add some extra perforations. Maybe they stop fracking, here at 9,000 feet, and they want to come up to 8,500 with some perforations and some stimulation. That's done on a Form 4, just gross interval change. So that wouldn't need this table, I don't think.
I would just say if a Form 2 is required, the table is there, so you'll need to fill it out. It looks like
That was
that
the
is
last
the
question we have.
end of our
Any other
questions.
questions?
Well, thank everyone for joining. Oh, did we just get another one?
Yes. Where TDS levels may vary across 10,000 parts per million threshold, should groundwater samples be cited as a source rather than a broader report?
So I would say if you have a sample from near the well, actual data is usually better than a broader regional report. So we would want to see the TDS from the actual data. But to Diane's earlier point, you could select sample data or groundwater sample from the drop down and then include a little bit more information in the comment. With
Anyone
that,
else?
then, that may be our last question.
Hope somebody else get back in.
Well, thank you everyone for joining today. As I said initially, our next engineering training will be on Braden Head monitoring, testing, and reporting. We don't have that scheduled yet, but keep a lookout for that. And then with regard to other mission change rules that will become effective in January, the management team is working on putting together a schedule for operator training for a variety of other topics.
The end?
In the end.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.